and welcome to the AT&T Cyber Threat Report for May 24th, 2012. Joining us today, we have Dave Gross, Jim Clausing, and I'm Brian Rexroad. And let's go ahead and get right into it here. First, welcome, Jim. And what do you plan to talk about today?
Yeah, Brian, came across this interesting story. We often see malware that attempts to exploit, browsers on various OSs or even various browsers by attacking, say, one of the applications that you've got installed or, the Java version that you've got installed. But this story that I came across today from Kaspersky was the first one where I had seen efforts to create browser plugins that work on multiple browsers, and the plugin itself is malicious. This particular one uses the Crosswriter system, which is a system that's in beta that is designed to allow you to create plugins for the three most popular browsers, i.e. Firefox and Chrome. With a simple single API, you can create the plugins for the three different browsers. And, it's kind of a nice idea if you're into writing, browser plugins. But the bad guys have taken advantage of this and created this one that the Kaspersky guys are calling LilyJade. And it's a plugin that it requires the user to actually browse to a site and accept the plugin to be installed. But it claims to be a Facebook thing. Don't really know what Lily is all about in Facebook, but there are plenty of apps in Facebook, so I assume it's related to one of those. And what it will do is it will pop up fake ads in some of the search engines and some of the popular sites. It will send out spam as it'll hijack your Facebook credentials and send out spam. Those kinds of things are nothing new. But what was kind of interesting to me was this idea of producing a plugin for the three most popular browser types. And so I thought I'd bring that up, mention it today. Not sure that it's all that widespread at the moment, but this was the first time I had seen anything like this.
This is an interesting one, and thanks for bringing it up. I think this is that ever-ending balance that is, you want to be able to have code portability between different platforms. Typically in the past, it's been the ability to provide portability between different hardware platforms, and now it's really sort of providing an API or capability to provide portability across different applications as well. And whereas that helps in terms of developing tools and making them more portable, obviously the bad guys can take advantage of that as well.
Exactly.
And you'd mentioned the concept that some of the things that they're doing here isn't new. It sounds like this initial thing is what I would call sort of on the weak side of malware. That is, if it's doing ad injection, that's one thing. I guess you did mention it can hijack your Facebook account, which would be potentially a strong propagation mechanism that we tend to trust our friends, and that can be hazardous if malware is able to get into the middle of that. I guess the other thing that it sort of comes to mind here is we have had this notion of blended threats for a significant amount of time, and I know that you and others have done a lot of analysis on malware that will incorporate a whole suite of different types of exploits that they'll attempt that isn't really cross-platform portability in the sense that's here, but certainly has the capability of doing exploits or injecting itself into various types of platforms just because it tries a whole bunch of different things.
Right, and that's the kind of attacks we've seen against multiple browsers in the past have been, well, we have a whole slew of browser exploits for various different versions, and we'll try them all. Mm-hmm. This one's a little different, but it's, that's the targets that the bad guys are going after these days. They're targeting the user side stuff. Mm-hmm. If you can get somebody to browse the wrong place or click on the wrong link, that's all it takes.
Yeah, absolutely, and a good point in the sense that it's moving up in terms of the what I'll call the hierarchy or the layers of application-ness, so to speak. Years ago it was mostly network exploits, and certainly as a part of the Internet Weather Report, there's still plenty of network-based exploits that are taking place. But still, as we move up, it's getting, it's gotten up to the application layer. Now this is plugins associated with applications too.
Yep. And did they say, does this require any user interaction in order to get it installed and activated?
It didn't say in the story, but the browsers that I'm familiar with do require some sort of acknowledgement before they'll install the plugins. I haven't tried it in the sacrificial environment yet. I was planning on doing that, but I ran out of time before our report today.
Yeah.
But I assume that it does take some acknowledgement, but it claims to be for some sort of a Facebook app, I assume. So if you're interested in that particular, game or app on Facebook, I assume you're going to go ahead and install it. So that's where I assume they're going after folks.
Right. So there's a bit of a social engineering activity here.
Absolutely, and I assume that in the spamming that it does when it hijacks your Facebook account, it invites your friends to play the game or whatever it is. It also, my understanding is that it also includes some links to some other exploit packs, the traditional browser exploit packs that we're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. That's very good. And if hopefully you'll get a chance to take a look at this a little more closely, and if there are any interesting developments with that, we'll look forward to an update next week. Let's go ahead and shift over to Dave here. Dave Gross, thank you for joining us today. And I think you had something to discuss with us as well today.
Yep. Thanks, Brian. And in keeping with the browser plugin theme here, I'll go along with that here. Yahoo just yesterday, actually, which is Wednesday, released a new application they're calling Axis. It's kind of a multifaceted thing. There are extensions that you have going into Chrome, into Firefox, Internet Explorer, Opera. They have all those extensions available, and they also have an app which is a browser on iOS devices for the iPhone and iPad. The idea here, I guess, is to have some coordination between the mobile devices and the desktop devices. So it seems that your bookmarks will follow you from one to the other, as will the browsing history and stuff like that. So what you do on one device, you can kind of pick up on the other device and continue. So it sounds like an interesting capability, and you're probably scratching your head saying, okay, so what's the security angle to this? And it turns out that even though it was just released yesterday, a security researcher, Nick Krubilovic, looked at what was released for Chrome and found that what was released for Chrome had included the private signing certificate for the code. And what this means is that anyone extracting that can forge signatures on extensions pretending to be Yahoo. and so they can develop any kind of extension and then, just put Yahoo's stamp of approval on there. And this researcher created a proof of concept code to demonstrate this. What he did is he took the original code, just copied it, and then he added a little script with a pop-up alert just to show that it was his code and not the original code. Yahoo has already responded to this by releasing a newer version of the Chrome extension without the private certificate included. It wasn't clear from what was said whether there was anything else done, like revoking that certificate and using a different signing certificate or whatever. I'm hoping that some of that was done as well, because that certificate is out there, even though it was for a very short time, and so you really want to close that exposure and not allow things to be signed by an authority.
I'm looking at a place here on SlashGear where they've indicated that that they've blacklisted the key with Google and that it's taken effect immediately. Now, if I understand correctly, and perhaps you have some other insight into this, but there isn't really a revocation process per se for certificates or for app signing certificates, but I guess there's apparently a way that the certificate can be blacklisted, and I assume that requires some sort of update to the device to assure that that blacklisting is actually sort of recognized by devices. Do you understand differently?
Or at least some sort of an update to the browser, because in this case it was on the Chrome extension. I am assuming that each of the different application extensions, for Firefox there would be a different key, Internet Explorer would be a different key. So I'm assuming this one is only the key for Chrome.
Right.
But I don't know that for sure.
And fortunately, Chrome for some time has had they do silent automatic updates. So if you fire up Chrome, you're going to get the update in pretty short order. So hopefully that'll limit their exposure. But we've seen it before with with certificate authorities and with the SSL certificates. Mm-hmm. It's the protection of the private key that is the biggest thing when you're talking about public key encryption.
Yep, and they may have just had two different pieces of the certificate there, two different certificates, and included the wrong one in the package.
Mm-hmm. And they generalize that just a bit. Having worked in cryptographic systems for quite some time, at least in the past, it was a long time ago, but, what we'd found, I don't want to belittle the complications of doing cryptography correctly, but generally speaking, the flaws in systems and the real challenges in terms of engineering and implementation have a lot less to do with the cryptography itself and a lot more to do with using it properly. And I think this is an example where protecting that private key, there was obviously a bit of a flaw in the process that was used there. And, the ideal way to do it, the reason we have FIPS 140-2 standards, for example, is to, put that private key in a place where it just can't leak out. And so this is a sort of a good example or a testimony for that type of a practice.
Yep.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dave, and a good topic. And let's go ahead and move in here. We're moving along quite rapidly today, and that's not a bad thing. So let's go ahead into the Internet Weather Report, and we can discuss some of the things that have gone on in the last week here. I have significantly trimmed down the anomalies that we've identified, and it's not for any bad reason. We have reported in the last few weeks some increasing activity in peer-to-peer protocols that we had basically ruled as not security relevant. So I'm not going to continue to report on those. There is still some growing activity along those lines, but along the lines of anomalies that would be more pertinent to security. We'll focus in on those today. So first one here is TCP destination port 210. We reported on this several times. It sort of came in at the top of the list this week. It's not as if that activity is growing significantly, although it does have some on and off sort of characteristics. So we'll take a little closer look at that. There's some scanning activity on port 161 UDP. This is SNMP. This actually turned out to be not really scanning activity. It's related to a denial of service attack, and we'll take a closer look at that as well. Next one is scanning activity on port 65500, which is as you might expect, that's a relatively unusual port to be scanning on. I did find a little bit of interesting information here, perhaps circumstantial, not necessarily conclusive. We'll take a look at that. And last but not least, scanning activity on port 1080. We've reported on this previously, but and this is TCP port 1080. We reported on it previously. There's still some continuing activity here that may be of interest. So digging in on port 210, this is activity that we've reported on several times before. I'm showing 90 days of activity in the graphic here, and this is in terms of the number of sources that are doing the scanning on that port. And we have, in our analysis, associated this activity with certain security camera DVRs. This is like security monitoring systems. It's a particular one that appears to it being exploited and turned into a botted device. And we've had some, I think, more in-depth discussions on this. In fact, Jim Boxmeyer, I think, had talked about this topic with us a couple of weeks ago. So, in any case, that activity is continuing. It's there are not as many contributors to this activity as we've seen in the past, but there's a good chance what's happening here is that certain devices are participating in terms of recruiting activity that is looking to identify exploitable devices and include them in the botnet, whereas other devices are sort of being moved off and perhaps not giving those commands and used for other purposes. Similar activity like this we've seen in the past. They've used these types of devices for denial of service attack activity predominantly, and there is some what I would call less tangible evidence that may be the case in this situation as well. So we're going to continue to investigate that further. The next item is what showed up in our activity as scanning on port 161 UDP, but it turns out that what this really is a denial of service attack activity, and this actually is, I believe, an attack that did make it into the press. I'm not going to go into the specifics or the association here, but it is one that was recognized. And just to give sort of a reference point of what these attacks look like, this is a case where, and I'm showing this in terms of relative traffic, but you can see sort of the noise floor or the level of activity we typically see in terms of packet activity on this particular port, 161 UDP. And what we're seeing are some pretty significant spikes that is many times the normal level of activity compared to normal of packet activity, and these were going toward specific addresses. Now, the reason it showed up as scanning activity is because it just by chance this attacker chose to use the same source port as destination port. So that appeared to come from a specific port and going to the same port, and again showed up as just a scanning activity.
Brian, one of the things that I didn't get a chance to look into, but I noticed, and I don't know if it's related at all, but I run a Linux distribution at home and just got an update in the last 2 days to the SNMP software on there. I haven't found the changelog to find out if there was a particular vulnerability there. I was just kind of surprised to see, the SNMP stuff is pretty stable on those Linux distributions, so I don't know if there was a particular vulnerability that was also being exploited in here or not. But well,
I'll just say there has been some discussion, and I don't think this has led to any specific recommendations on changing SNMP, but certainly there has been discussion on the concerns around amplification attacks using SNMP. I think a good improvement to the protocol might be to control how many times you're willing to respond to the same request from the apparent same source. So I doubt that was actually what was in there, but since you mentioned it, it kind of came to mind. I don't know of any direct correlation between the two, but it is interesting that there have been some updates recently. There are always opportunities to improve these protocols to make them more resistant to abuses. Most protocols aren't really designed with potential abuses in mind, and certainly it's difficult to predict how they get abused. Hopefully we can be more reactive to that.
And it looked like that activity had stopped, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It seemed to, and I should have pointed out more specifically here, this was specifically between about, it looks like May 7th or so, very spurious activity, basically a spike per day, so to speak, and not particularly sustained up to about the end of May 17th that activity occurred. Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
The next item here is what showed up as scan probes on port 65500 TCP, and this port isn't really assigned to any specific application. I'm showing 30 days of data here. Now, this activity, this scanning activity, was coming from several sources from China, and the most aggressive source did a little bit more digging and also found that this source was also scanning on port 3389 as well as 4899. Now, 3389 we've talked about many times. This is related to remote desktop protocol. And 4899, I don't think we've talked about this one for some time, but that is RAdmin, which is also basically a remote desktop tool. So between the two of these, you might conjecture that port 65500 might be some type of not well-known application that provides access to a desktop. So I didn't find anything specific that pointed in that direction other than the sort of coincidental conclusion that the most aggressive scanner here was also scanning for other types of desktop access protocols.
Or potentially a backdoor left by somebody exploiting a vulnerability in one of the other ones earlier.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We, in fact, do have some information in our database. I elected not to include it here, but there was some malware that in the past has been associated with use of this port. I didn't know specifically how it used this port. Could possibly have been a backdoor, so that is quite possible. Mm-hmm. And this activity, we've seen little spikes of activity here, but it basically had picked up around, it looks like May 22nd here and continues on. Somewhat spurious in the activity, but what I would describe as sort of medium aggressive, so in the millions of probes, tens of millions of probes per hour in some cases. Next one item here, we have talked about this one before, port 1080 TCP. This is associated with SOX. We've reported on this at least the last 3 weeks or so. And one new interesting observation was, first of all, most of the activity is coming from what I previously and continue to maintain as what I describe as suspicious sources in the United States. What I mean by that is it appears that perhaps those servers are not in the, they may have been compromised in some way or another, or are, purposely set up for doing malicious activity. Second one sort of point here is that there are other servers, several other sources involved, mostly from Taiwan. There are some others as well. But what was kind of interesting is the most active source, and in many of these cases there is a sort of a top hitter, a sort one address that is the predominant source of this scanning activity, and this is no exception. Investigating a little bit further, we also found that source that is most aggressive in this scanning activity was also found on previous days scanning on port 22040 TCP. I had to do a little bit of digging to find out what was associated with that port, and there is an application called Ultra Mobile PC that uses that port. There may be others. but in this particular case, Ultramobile PC is basically a tool for synchronizing a computer that you'd be taking on the road with another computer, so that you would have sort of an up-to-date image that you can take with you. Now, if this port were exposed on the Internet, clearly it would provide the potential opportunity for somebody to basically create an image of your computer, so to speak, or at least the information on there for perusing, so we'll say that. So I'm not sure how closely related these are, other than the fact that they came from the same source, but certainly you want to pay attention to both of those. And it turns out that in our top scan ports, I believe, actually, perhaps not. This did show up as an anomaly otherwise, but not in the top set of anomalies. It is the scanning on port 22040. And again, back to the port 1080 activity, we still see sort of spurious activity, although it does seem to be at a lesser level than we had reported previously. So taking a sort of a look at the overall level of activity we've seen, or the distribution, top 10 most probed ports, no surprises here in particular. We did see at the top of the list port 445 as usual. 1433 is a sort of a close second. Every once in a while we have a day where port 1433 beats out 445 in terms of the most probes. 3389 TCP, we talked about that, RDP, oftentimes looking for weakly protected, that is, weak passwords, and we have reported recently on an exploit associated with RDP that allows authentication bypass. Port 22 and port 23 TCP, this is oftentimes password guessing activities as well. We have also reported on port 27977, and in the past, loosely or perhaps associated with TDSS malware. And Jim, you had pointed out a relationship between 27977 and some other activity. Do you recall specifically?
Yeah, on my home system, I was monitoring this, and just happened to notice that the same sources that were probing 27977 were also probing TCP 6515 and TCP 36081, which I think the 36081, I think we talked about a month or a month and a half ago on the program. And I was just kind of surprised that there were a lot of machines from the same general area that it appeared to be doing the same sort of scanning. As I looked at it more closely, the correlation actually was even stronger between the other two ports. The ones that were scanning on 36081 were all scanning on 6515. They weren't necessarily always, although most of the time they were also scanning for 27977. So don't know what malware might be checking for all three of those, but there was at least a group of machines that all appeared to be infected in the same AS that seemed to be scanning for this and those other two ports.
Right. So perhaps not to get into too much because we haven't investigated the details of this, but it appeared to me that there may have been some sort of a systemic problem. That is, in a cloud service provider, we've seen a few different examples of different situations. And perhaps this is something we can jump into in more detail at some point, but it appears that there are still some administrative challenges associated with cloud services. That is, as the cloud service provider, they provide an image that somebody has been given access to, and sometimes it seems like there are some administrative items that get dropped on the floor. That is, anybody can buy a cloud service image, and it's already exposed on the Internet effectively, and when the user accesses it, there's a sort of a presumption in many cases that certain passwords are going to be set properly for the applications on there. It may not have been locked down in some cases. We've seen cases where basically every cloud image defaults to have a DNS server that's exposed to the Internet. So this is quite possibly a case where in that handoff process to the organization or user that has purchased the cloud service is not properly locking it down, and as a consequence, they're becoming sort of owned by somebody with a malicious intent.
Yeah, there's also the issue that once the cloud owner turns it over to the customer that's actually going to utilize it, they typically lose control of the patching process and stuff like that. You know, it's usually up to the owner of that particular instance to maintain their own machine. And so if they don't have good practices, then you wind up having issues that look like it's coming from that cloud provider when actually it's coming from these individual machines that aren't being maintained well.
Yes, absolutely. So, I don't mean to suggest that all cloud service providers have this problem, but it certainly would be something that is, if you are looking to purchase cloud services, make sure there's a pretty clear set of responsibilities in terms of what the user is supposed to do, what the of that cloud service, what the cloud service provider is actually providing, and make sure that matches against what typical or expected best security practices would be for any machine that's built up from the raw. But I digress. Digging into this a little bit more, we have a couple of ports here, port 80 and port 8080, that are in the most probed ports category. We're going to take a little closer look at that in a minute or so here, because it did sort of show up as an anomaly, and I think we're in the process of posting an Internet Protect alert related to it. Looking at the most sources probing, that is the number of sources that are probing on a particular port, as usual, 445 is way up on the top. We talked about port 23. There are a lot of sources probing for that. Port 8080 showed up on here, and we'll take a look at that in the next view graph really quickly. Port 3389 has a lot of sources probing on it. Port 210 is showing up in the top 10 list. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And last but not least, port 1562, which was the P-Connect manager. And with that, and I have some that are also showing up here that are grayed out, a lighter color. Those are not considered to be security related. They're related to a few different peer-to-peer type applications. So digging in a little bit more into port 8080 TCP and port 80 TCP, showing 90 days of activity here. And we are seeing sort of an upward trend that is starting around the end of April timeframe, and the beginning of April timeframe, just around April 5th, I would say. There's sort of a clear upward trend. There have been drops in that activity, but there's a clear upward trend in the amount of scanning activity, and as well as the number of sources that are doing that scanning on both of those ports. Now, there's a clear correlation between the two. That is, the sources that are scanning on port 8080 as well as port 80 are under a common control here. And just in the last day or so, we've seen sort of a specific surge associated with activity on port 8080 as opposed to 8080. On port 80, it's sort of stayed at a lower level. So for some reason, there may be some stronger interest in scanning activity or scanning on port 8080 at the moment. But the most of the probes and most of the sources are coming from China in this particular case. The sources, there are a number of sources from the U.S. as well. They're sort of a close second in terms of the number of sources that are participating. And there's mixed participation. And what I mean by that is some of these sources can clearly be identified as consumer accesses or perhaps small business accesses, and some others can be identified as cloud services. So I think true to the discussion that we had earlier, it appears that what is happening is machines are being exploited, most likely ones that are hosting a web server for one reason or another. And we don't know specifically what the exploit is there, but it is well known, certainly, that there are a lot of website tools, embedded systems that expose websites to the Internet that could potentially be exploited. So it probably would be a a good idea for us to investigate that a little bit further, but that's the extent of information I have for you right now.
And from this graph, Brian, it looks like, as you were saying, starting from early in April, there was a pretty good correlation between the scanning on port 80 and port 8080. And then it looks like a little after the second week in May, there was scanning that peaked on port 80 that didn't seem to correlate so much with the 8080 stuff.
Right.
And then that seems to have subsided, and now they're doing the port 8080. So maybe instead of doing that scanning together, they're doing more aggressive scanning, and so they're doing it separately.
That's a good possibility. These may be indicators of evolution in the tools that are being used. Changes, from their perspective, the folks that are doing the scanning here, from their perspective, improvements in the efficiency of the tools and perhaps trying to take advantage of where they're getting the most benefit from the scanning activity. So absolutely, Dave, there are some points here where they've made a couple of changes here, and that would be an indication of the changes they're making in the techniques or perhaps the tools that are being used. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. Any other comments before we close out here today? All right, well, I'd like to just point out with you, this will be the last installment of the Cyber Threat Report. That's not bad news, however. In the future, we will be providing a new name for our program. Our program will be called AT&T ThreatTraq. You'll be able to find us in the same place as before. You'll be able to gain the same content as previously, but as you might expect, we're in the process of continuing to improve our format, improve the programming, improve the efficiency of the programming, and get the information to you that you need and want. So with this, we continue to solicit your feedback, and whether you have suggestions for the program, articles we should cover, corrections, we are happy to hear from you. You can still contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. You can find some of us on the Networking Exchange blog. That's networkingexchangeblog.att.com, and there's a security topics category there. You can reach this program from the AT&T Tech Channel. That's techchannel.att.com. And it is also available from YouTube. Just search for the AT&T Tech Channel. It's available as a podcast in audio form through iTunes. Just search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report, as well as from FeedBurner in MP3 format. With that,
Brian, I just wanted to mention for those people that don't have the visual here that that new show title, that ThreatTraq, ends with a Q.
Yeah, thank you.
If you couldn't hear it in Brian's voice there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. So with that, the ThreatTraq is ThreatTraq, one word, ending in a Q as opposed to a CK. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dave and Jim, for joining today. And please keep your network safe.